channel. It is now officially my favorite time of year, Halloween season. Not only does it mean that it's now socially acceptable to be a little dark and creepy, it's also costume season and I love dressing up. Now, if you follow my channel, last year I made a Princess Tia beanie and Elfo costume from the show Disenchantment. But I didn't have time to finish the trio and make something for Lucy. And I already had a bunch of projects set up for this Halloween season that I didn't think I was gonna get to Lucy again. But instead, I decided to challenge myself to see if I could make a Lucy costume that I could complete in a day. So I bring you a very simple, very cheap, and very quick to make Lucy costume. Because I just couldn't not complete the trio, you know? Anyway, so let's get started. Here are the three components of this Lucy costume. Firstly, we have the black gloves that just look like those three giant claws that he has instead of just regular finger gloves. A tail piece with a portion that fits over a belt. And lastly, a giant Lucy mask. And yes, those eye holes you can see out of. I basically tried to make all these components as 2D as possible because our favorite talking cat seems to be some sort of magical 2D. Here are all of the supplies that I bought for this costume. I have 2 giant pieces of foam poster board, some black craft foam, a giant roll of white craft foam, black fabric, hot glue, and a black hat, which is optional. I basically just needed that to help measure the size of my head. As you're watching this video, please remember that I literally threw this together in a morning, so some pieces are more improvised than I would have liked them to be. Okay, so the first thing we're gonna tackle is the big Lucy mask. So like I said, I have 2 giant pieces of black like foam poster board, so really all it is like a really thick board with like a foam center, and I just used this to basically trace out and cut out the outline of Lucy's head. So this doesn't include the ears or the teeth or anything, it's just a flat section of his head. Once one side is cut out, I just use that to trace the second one, just so that they're identical, and just cut out that second piece so that we have the 2 flat faces for the mask. One important thing to note that I'm going to say right now is to save all of your scraps because we will be using them. I mean every single scrap, whether that's from the poster board, the craft foam, or the fabric. Save all your scraps. Okay. I'm going to remind you again. Then I cut out 2 of the eye shapes using the white craft foam, and then I traced where I was going to be placing those eyes over top of each side. This is just so that we can line up where we want to cut out the vision holes because we want them to be where the pupils are going to be. So basically once you trace where the eyeball is going to be, you cut out like a little square area that you know is going to be where you're going to be looking out of. Then take some very sheer black fabric and hot glue it over top of that hole that you just cut out. Also, before I did that though, I traced that cutout that I had onto the back side of the eyeball so that I could, again, better decide where to put the pupil. And I did place the pupils on different spots on each side of the mask just to see if it really mattered. And honestly, it just kind of depends on where it lines up with your head. I don't know. Anyway, and then you cut the pupil out of the white eyeball portion. Back to the mask, which again now has the black sheer fabric hot glued over that vision hole on the back side. Then on the front side, you just want to hot glue down that eyeball again so that the pupil lines up with that sheer fabric. And then now you have an eyeball that you can see out of. And voila! I now have an eyeball that I can see out of. Again, you just have to make sure that this fabric is very sheer because putting like cotton over this is just going to be about as blinding as regular forward. But if it's sheer, you can see out of it, no problem. Now to figure out how wide I needed to make this mask so that it would fit over my head, but sit nicely on my shoulders, I just sized up this hat to fit my head and then measured how far apart these two sides of the mask were. So here I am doing that measurement. And now we will see where those scraps come in, because here I'm using a scrap piece of that foam board, and I'm going to be using as many of those scrap pieces of foam board as I can muster so that I can have as many attachments as possible. And basically I measure out the width that I need the mask to be, and then keep a little bit on each side of that piece so that I can bend it down and then attach that to each side. So here, as an example, I'm just bending down each side that's going to be attached to the actual mask, and then that section in between is the proper width that I need. I hot glued all of those flat pieces to one side of the mask and then let that dry. Here I'm just giving you a little close-up view. And then once that's dried, I start attaching it to the top. During that process, you may need to just be securing it in place as the hot glue dries, but once everything is done, here we have that basic skeleton for the mask with the two flat sides and then those pieces holding those sides together. Now we're going to cover that with craft foam. So basically I just hot glue the craft foam to the outer edges of the mask and then like all along the outside, leaving a section where my head can fit through. Now here I'm using a couple different like pages of the black craft foam. You can find really large rolls of black craft foam, and if I had found them in the city I live in, I would have been using that because that would have saved me so much time. But I went to 3 different stores and they only had large rolls of the white craft foam. And again, I was trying to get this done in a day, so I wasn't gonna order it and then wait and then have to go pick it up. Anyway, if you wanna save time, that's an option. They do exist. Using more of the foam board scraps, I cut out his 2 ears and then I just hot glued them to like the middle, I guess, of it. Again, I wanted this to be 2D, so I didn't want like 2 different sets of ears. And then I did the same for the teeth, and the mask is complete. Now, it doesn't sit on my head very well when I'm, you know, wearing a bun or whatever, just because that's not how I measured it to be. But with my hair down, it fits nicely over my head and sits on my shoulders. It's really, really lightweight just because of what it's made out of. And again, it sits on my shoulders, and I can see out of those holes on the side. From the front, it doesn't look like much, and from the side, again, we want that flat face to make it look kind of 2D because our talking cat is a very special talking cat. Now for the tail, I cut out 2 symmetrical pieces on the large sheet of white craft foam. Again, if you found the black, you wouldn't have to take white and paint it black, but whatever. Then using scraps from that foam board, I created this little box that fits over my belt. It doesn't need to be incredibly wide, just wide enough for it to be sturdy. And then I took some really thin wire and punched it through that block and then just kind of like hastily wrapped it around. I also doubled up on the wire so that it could be a little thicker and stronger, so I just kind of like twisted it together. And then this is going to be the base for our tail, so make it a pretty long piece. Then I did this a second time directly under that first punch. Again, this is going to be the base for the tail, so you want them to be in line with each other. So I then took one of those pieces of the tail and hot glued in like just a couple spots along the tail, each piece of that wire, so that they sat flat on that piece of the tail. And then to finish it off, I just took the second symmetrical piece and hot glued all around the edge over top of that first piece that had the wire on it. You can add as much glue as you want to reinforce it, and then flattened it down. Now we're going to talk about creating that pattern for those 3-clawed gloves if you want to go for that. So I just spread out my hand as wide as possible into 3 claws and then traced that, and then taking that initial trace, give yourself some extra space around the entire thing and then draw an outline of that. This is just so that when you sew the pieces together, you have a little extra room to like flip it inside out and all of that to make it look a little neater. And then finally add some points to the end of that outer outline so that you can have them look more like claws and less like some weird mitten. A couple things to note while you're making the gloves, again, if you decide to go for this extra step, is to use some fabric that has some stretch to it. That way it's easier to like get your hand in and out of, or use when you're holding things and grabbing things. I unfortunately did not do that because I was trying to reuse that sheer fabric that I had used for the eyeballs, but that fabric was like very stiff and ended up being terrible gloves. And so then I like ripped them the first time I was wearing them and had to Frankenstein them back together. Anyway, again, stretch your fabric is better if you decide to do this. And then once you have all the pieces of this cut out, so you're gonna have 4 total pieces cut out of that outline, sandwich 2 of the pieces together and then sew or fabric glue along the outside of it so that you can now have a glove, and then flip it inside out and you are good to go. So there you have it, the 3 major components of the Luci costume. The gloves, the tail, and the mask, and then all you need for the body is some black clothing. I already had a couple thoughts on like how to improve this a little bit. One being to swap out or cut a hole in the front of the mask where that craft foam is, and also add some of that sheer fabric there so that you could see out the front of the mask, which I did not do, but I think that would be a worthwhile addition if you decide to make this yourself. Again, using the stretchy fabric for the gloves, and then maybe a sturdier middle or thicker wire for the tail, but I was using what I had, and here's our final result. Woohoo! That's it for this video. Thank you guys for watching. If you go ahead and try this out, please let me know if you have any sort of suggestions for other people who may be wanting to try it. Again, I know this was a really quick version of this, and there's definitely some places where this could be enhanced a little bit. Please leave those in the comments. Go ahead and let us know what you're going to be for Halloween in the comments, just because I'm getting so hyped and I just kind of want to hear what you guys are up to. Check out the other videos that I have on my channel and subscribe to stay tuned for more cosplays, costumes, crafts, and all the other random stuff I have. If you enjoyed it or found it useful or it inspired you in some way for your own costume, please go ahead and give me a thumbs up.